Nothing I've ever said has drawn more resistance than this: that salvation is not detached from knowledge, but accompanies knowledge and faith, specifically in the promise and fulfillment dialectic of Scripture that results in Jesus as Messiah. That claim provokes an immediate reaction, because many hold, often implicitly, that nothing is actually required for saving faith at all. Not in content, not in structure, not in grounding. Faith becomes a kind of undefined turning, a disposition, a moment. Now, early on, I did a video when I was just trying to figure out how to do these things, asking whether faith is naive. And what I argued there is that this idea of naive faith is not biblical, it's modern. It's something read back into the text, not drawn from it. Because when you actually look at the New Testament, you see something very different. You see sermons, Acts 2, city in Antioch in Acts of the Apostles 13, where everything is grounded explicitly in what God had already said and what has now been fulfilled. You see Paul in Acts 26 saying he proclaims nothing but what the prophets and Moses said would come. You see the opening of the Epistle to the Romans, chapter 1, grounding the gospel in what was promised beforehand through the prophets. And you see every single theological discussion grounded in messianic prophecy. And more than that, in every scene where salvation is declared, justified, saved, counted righteous, the informational content is not incidental, it's central. It is the decisive element. But we ignore it. And because our own conception of faith is not grounded in that way, what we do instead is go looking for exceptions. Apparent breaks in the pattern. Cases that seem to show salvation without that content. And the number one example that is always brought forward is the thief on the cross, with Cornelius coming in a close second. So the question is simple, but it has to be answered carefully. Does the thief on the cross actually escape the prophetic context? Or is he, in fact, one of the clearest demonstrations of it? Everyone uses the thief on the cross as the simplest case of salvation. No theology, no preparation, no knowledge. Just a man in his final moments turning to Jesus and being saved. And from that, a conclusion is drawn. Saving faith can be naive, contentless, detached from any real knowledge of who Jesus is. But that assumes a lot. And you can only do this if you remove the thief from the heavy prophetic context. That conclusion about the thief only works if the thief knew nothing. Nothing about Jesus. Nothing about Messiah. Nothing about the Scriptures. And that assumption is not in the text. It is imposed upon it. Now, by the time of the crucifixion, Jesus is not obscure. His actions, his teachings, his claims, and the controversy surrounding him are widely known. The setting intensifies this. Passover, Jerusalem filled with expectation. And even at the cross, the category being used is explicitly messianic. Are you not the Christ? In Luke 23. The framework is already present at the scene. The idea that a man condemned in Judea at that time had no exposure to any of this is not grounded in the text. It's not grounded in history. It's a convenience introduced to support a conclusion. Now, listen carefully to what the thief actually says. Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. This is not a vague religious appeal. It's precise, it's royal, It's eschatological. He's identifying what a condemned man, dying beside him, as a king whose kingdom is still coming. He does not ask to be saved from death. He does not ask for relief. He speaks of a kingdom that is not visible at the very moment when the kingship appears to have been falsified. And that is not naive faith, that is recognition under contradiction. And here's where the argument must be made explicit. That recognition only has meaning if it is chained to the prior scriptural witness. Kingdom is not a generic religious word. It's a defined expectation shaped by the law and the prophets, the anticipation of a king appointed by God whose reign would be established even through suffering and vindication. Without that framework, the thief's statement dissolves into ambiguity. With it, it becomes exact. He is identifying Jesus as the one of whom the Scripture spoke. The informational breadth is minimal, but the referential object is not reduced. His faith is compressed, not detached. And I want you to please be aware, again, he does not ask Jesus to save him from his present suffering. He asks him to allow him into his kingdom after both of their deaths. But we're not done here. Jerome said this: he did not see him in his radiant glory or behold him looking down from heaven. He did not see the angels serving him. To put it plainly, he certainly did not see Christ walking about in freedom, but on a gibbet, drinking vinegar and crowned with thorns. He saw him fastened to the cross and heard him begging for help. My God, why have you forsaken me? That is, he heard Jesus invoking Psalms 22. He saw him drink the vinegar from Psalms 22. He saw him nailed to the cross with a sign, King of the Jews, over his head, and crowned with thorns, the suffering servant of Psalms 22. Overall, this is the difference between quantity and quality of faith. The quantity of articulated knowledge may be small, we don't know. It may have been significant here. But regardless, the quality of recognition is exact. He acknowledges his own guilt, affirms Jesus' innocence, and identifies him as a suffering servant and the coming king. Given the circumstances, that is sufficient. But sufficient precisely because it is correctly oriented toward the identity of Jesus as Messiah, not because it bypasses that identity. And this is not an isolated case. The same structure appears elsewhere, which means this is not an exception but a pattern. Take Paul the Apostle. In Acts of the Apostles, in 9, Paul is not gradually persuaded into belief. He is confronted. A revelation interrupts him and forces recognition. And what he recognizes is not a new religious idea, but the identity of Jesus as the fulfillment of the Scriptures he already knew very, very well. Salvation here is not contentless. It is revelatory. Now, bring in the number 2 guy, Cornelius, because this is not a secondary example. It clarifies the structure. He's a God-fearer, already formed by the Scriptures of Israel, already possessing the framework in which Messiah is expected. So when Peter arrives in Acts of the Apostles 10, he does not introduce Jesus as unknown. He begins by saying, you yourselves know what happened throughout all Judea, how God anointed Jesus of Nazareth. He says this to everyone in attendance, including Cornelius. The events are already known. What is lacking is their identification. And Peter brings that identification to its decisive point. To him, all the prophets bear witness that through his name, everyone who believes in him receives forgiveness of sins. And it is at that exact point, while Peter is still speaking, that the Spirit falls. Not before, not apart from it, but in conjunction with that identification. So Cornelius is not an example of contentless faith, but a prior knowledge brought to its proper conclusion. What was already known, now recognized and fulfilled. So the pattern is clear. The thief, Paul, Cornelius, different conditions, one structure, not ignorance leading to faith, but recognition. Now, what varies is not the object of faith, but the conditions under which that recognition occurs. For the thief, it is compressed into a single moment under suffering. For Paul, it's forced through revelation. For Cornelius, it is clarified through proclamation. But in every case, the same structure holds. Exposure to what God has done, recognition of its meaning, and identification of Jesus as the one anticipated beforehand. So the thief is not lowering the standard of faith. He's revealing what faith is when everything else is stripped away. No time, no development, no reinforcement, no community. And what remains is this: the recognition that the one being crucified is the coming King. And that recognition only has meaning because it connects, however compressed, to this prior scriptural Old Testament witness concerning the Messiah. So this is not naive faith. It's concentrated faith. And even at the point of death, it does not bypass the content of God's revelation. It arrives at it.